The Sheets course, here we go. So as I mentioned, it'll go into a bunch of deep dives, a bunch of lighter stuff, but a pretty good intro to Google Sheets and some more advanced content. You should be in this document. If you click on folder, it'll give you the list of files that we'll use for the course. You'll see each person's folder goes here. Why don't you right now everyone go into that folder and create a folder with your name or something that identifies it for you. Your name is probably one good way to do it. But if everyone can do that right now, create a folder for yourself, that'd be great.
Can everyone click their mouse off of that so I can click it? It is. What are we supposed to do after we got in there?
Everyone should create a folder for themselves. Emily, Justin, Matt, nice work.
Zach really needs some help.
That's why I'm here. Thanks for the time.
Zach, thank you for being vulnerable about your lack of tech skills.
It's okay.
I'm sorry, I'm not going as empathetic as I should be.
Very funny, Emily.
But
Very funny.
And while people are doing that, everyone can also click on the demo sheets file. And what you're opening when you're doing that is just the Sheets file in here, the Google Sheets demo. For that one, same thing. If everyone can then make a copy of that, go to File, make a copy, name it something with your name in it again, and then save it in your folder. So you name it, whatever you want. Jared Google Sheets demo. Then you click on the folder down here and you go into your folder. Each person's folder goes here. I'd go into Jared, and I click select for it to go there. So when you're done with these two steps, you should have your own copy of this file in your folder in that each person's folder section. You should rename the file something with your name in it. Either way, it'll be in your folder, so it's not vital, but you should probably rename it something with your name in it. And what we'll do is you'll follow along as I now go through a lot of the lessons. So this will be a good way you can click around in that file, you can edit that file, you can do lots of stuff with that file as you need to. Is anyone besides Anna having a big problem right now?
It default puts me in my personal email like every time.
Oh yeah, it did that to me
I
too.
keep on. Yeah.
You should have a separate profile for your personal.
That'll be the next class.
I can show you how to do that later on.
Thank you.
Everyone, anyone not ready?
So it should be in our copy.
You should be in your copy right now, yep. Your copy of this sheet,
And where
of
is
the
it
Google
going?
Sheet.
Not folder.
Everyone good? Anyone not good? Okay, great. Okay, so here we go. So this will be the basis for the course. There's lots of demo sheets in there, lots of functions in there, lots of formulas. You can use that in the future too. You may want to refer back to it as a source for some of the knowledge you'll gain here. But we'll walk through that now in detail so you'll see how it works. Here we go, some basics. So number one, when you are making any sheet, any database of any kind, you want one master sheet, one master table that is everything. Too often people you'll see things that look more like views like this and lots of them going sideways, going down. If you're starting there, you're probably doing something wrong. You want one source of truth, one source of clean data that you take lots of views of, that you can sum, that you can filter, that you can query, that you can do things to. But the main point is you want one clean table that looks like this, that is just lots of data. That's really important. If you start there, everything else will be much easier because you can then do all the stuff you need to work on to do it, but it'll be super easy because you're just then applying different formulas to the same one data source. And we'll get into this more in a minute, but having one source of truth is just always a good thing because there's not too many versions, you're losing things, you don't know if you're looking at old things. It's a really important just idea that you have one place for all the data, one place that people go every time. From that, you'll then make, as I'm saying, different views of it. So you'll have whatever you want it to be, but you can have a monthly view, a summary view, other different examples, but everything will be based on that one source of data. You'll have one true source of data that is all the truth. It's not for analysis, it's not for functions. You don't start making a mess of this and putting all sorts of stuff over here at the bottom. You don't have subtotals, you don't have totals at the bottom. It is just the data. From there, you'll do different things to pull what you want from it. So you can join different functions or different tables if you want. As an example, This is my master data table. But not all this is original data. If you go over the mouse, you'll see this is original. You see based on the number 7 is just the number 7. Mechanical spring is just mechanical spring. As you go, though, you'll see things like VLOOKUP. What that means is that you can connect tables. So you have 2 original sources, right? For us, it's master and it's lookup. These are the 2 original sources of data that we're working with. In this case, this is every single product that we sell. And I'll use product loosely, but for our purposes, that's what matters. It's every product we sell. This is, in this case, we're assigning per brand a type. What that means is that all this column is doing is looking for the name of the brand in this table and then pulling back the one that is listed next to it. So for regional dialect, for example, hey guys. No problem. So for regional dialect, for example, it just looks for it in this column. It sees, oh, there's regional dialect, and it grabs pale ale. And then you'll see it puts pale ale right here for you. So there's a lot of things happening here. We'll go into the lookup function in a few minutes. The main point is that these are the 2 original sources. These are the only places you put in data. This is where everything else is based on. So one thing to think about also is that in some cases you'll have formulas too. Again, you don't want the main table to be too much calculation because you don't want to do much analysis there. But for things like this, you may want just multiply price by count to have a total. Those things are generally fine. A simple formula is fine. Don't make this a lot of analysis. As you can see, most of this is original data source, as I mentioned. But for lookups, for simple formulas, you may sometimes want to do that if you want to apply it to every row of the table, and if it applies uniformly to every row of the table. So the main thing is, again, it is one source of data, one source of truth. That is the main source. I'll stop for a minute and give you guys. Do you guys know? So if you go to the calendar invitation, yeah, you'll see, and I have this in my ear because I'm recording it for anyone who couldn't make it. If you go to the calendar invitation, you'll see a link to this file. When you're there, I'll go slow, but when you're there, you'll click on the folder. It'll pull up this folder. Looks like someone made a mess of my folder already. This is why we can't have nice things. But your stuff should go into each person's folder. You'd make your own folder in there like some of the better performers in the class did. And then in your folder, you'll make a copy of this file. So I'll give you guys a second, otherwise it won't be super helpful, but I'll give you guys a second to catch up. It looks like Anna's my TA for the moment, but if you guys need a second or questions, just tell me.
Make a copy of the demo.
Yep, then go to demo, go to file, make a copy, rename it with your name in it or whatever you name it, and then put it into your folder that you created. I'm going to find out who did this later. I'm going to come get you.
There's pizza also, if you guys want pizza.
You guys good? How's it going over there? Yep, good? Everyone, yep? Okay, so the quick catch-up is I was just talking about how generally you have one data source. This is the one main source of truth. This is where you try to keep all your data in one place. Sometimes you have lookups that will attach to data sources, but you still have one source of truth for each piece of data. As I was saying before, you enter data once. You don't enter it in multiple places. You don't enter multiple times. You really want to put it in one time. And then no matter who is using it at the company, you all go to the same place for the same data. So if someone corrects it once, if someone enters it once, you're not doing it repeatedly. You don't have old versions of things I was saying before. It's one time. What that means is DRY is the acronym for it, but don't repeat yourself. DRY, don't repeat yourself. You do these things once. You don't. It's really a coding term of if you write code, you don't want to write the same code again. You want to refer back to that same code. In this case, it's the same concept though. Don't repeat yourself. Don't enter the data twice. Don't have two data sources. It's really important. That is the function. That is like the basis for all the data stuff we'll do. Same thing with the data entry process, all these things. It avoids the extra work, avoids inconsistent data, minimizes mistakes, avoids people looking at old versions. It even helps often, and you'll see me do this, I'll often name the title something like current. Or if it's old, I'll name it something like old with a date on it so that you'll know when I did it. So it's a good way to keep versions accurate and current. But the main point is you have one source of truth. However you do that, you have one source of truth, one place that everything's done. As I was saying before, then you can change things in one place. So my example was, so regional dialect pale ale, let's say that was actually an IPA. Or like to make it stand out, let's just say it was, we'll just put a funny character in there. Let's say it was HHH. That is the one place that I have to change regional dialect. I have to change it nowhere else. Now that I change it there, automatically here, it will update in this entire table. So instead of going down and doing this 1,000 times on this table, I did it, and here's 3 examples of how it changed right away. This is why it's so powerful. It is one source of truth, one place to change everything. It is really smooth. And then if I did have this done right, all the views that I have of this would all update automatically too. So everything would then just be clean and neat and up to date. So I'll change that back. As I was saying before, data that you put in should be one clean main data source. What that means is data in spreadsheets goes down, not sideways. Right? When you enter a new piece of data, it should be going down. That's why spreadsheets are so long. That's why you can add thousands of rows, and that's why they go on forever. That's why it goes up to thousands of rows, but only goes up to, right now, Z. You can certainly make it wider, but they're made to go down. That is how databases, that's how spreadsheets should work. They go down as you add rows. You go horizontally as you add categories of data, as you add a new field for this stuff, right? You have your category, your package. If you wanted another piece of data, you'd add it, but you should be going down a lot. You should be going horizontally much less often. Horizontally should be a bigger change you're making because that's going to change the data structure. That's going to change the lookups, change the views. It's a bigger change. Down should be easy. The second you add a new row at the bottom, everything else would account for it. The lookups account for it. The views account for it. It just all is very smooth. So these are the basic building blocks of all the data stuff we're doing. IDs are just a concept that you can use. IDs can be nice when you are moving data to different places because it's just always going to be attached to this row. It's a way to identify data. It's a nice thing to do. These are not vital. This is more as you do more intense data work, you're going to want IDs to identify a certain row of data. Obviously, spreadsheets have row numbers too, which makes it a little bit less necessary. But as you move things around, or if you started inserting rows up here, the ID doesn't change, but the row number does. So it's just a way to always have consistent IDs. Again, not vital. As you have more complicated databases, you will want things like that. Our production database has IDs for every batch. So you know this is a batch ID. I'm referring to batch 712 or 718B. It can be a nice way to identify data. So I was talking about views before. So once you have that clean look, you can do almost anything with this. It definitely gets more complicated the more complicated stuff you want to do. But there's a function for basically anything. So whatever you want from this table now, you can get easily. As an example, here's a monthly view of the data. This is just looking at every month, the month ending in that date, give me total revenue, average product revenue check. Checks we'll get to in a minute, but it's a way to just check your data to make sure you're doing it accurately. And a count of products. That is the power that you can just do a million views of that one source of data. You change the data once, and every view updates cleanly and accurately. Same thing for the summary. This is just a summary of the table. So the earliest date that we have in the table, the latest date, the total units. Simple stuff. But it becomes powerful when you have whatever view you want of the table in a nice clean look, right? There's not 32 tables here. It's a nice clean look. And it is always accurate. You change the main table, every view changes. So it's a really powerful way to do it. And we'll go into the formulas in these sheets in a few minutes. This is just a tip, and this is a personal thing, but formatting does matter. You'll notice your eyes when eyes look at this, it can just be overwhelming and you can lose focus and glaze over and not really care. It does help to bold column headers, to center them, to have some color coding, have background colors. It depends on how you want to do it, and there's no rules for this, but just think about that when you're doing this stuff. How is the person digesting this going to be helped by me changing the formats? So, right, column widths, column heights, bolding, column colors, row colors. Those are all really nice ways to make things more digestible. So just something to keep in mind. One thing also to keep in mind is that you can zoom in and out on just your screen. This is changing just my screen, not everyone's. So if you do want to change the size of a spreadsheet because you can or can't see it, you can always do that. Just Command plus and minus will zoom in and out. Just a little tip that doesn't, usually if you change the text size, you would change it for everyone. If you do that, it just changes it for you. So it's a nice way to just custom your own view sometimes. So checks I mentioned a second ago, spreadsheets, they're hard. They're really easy ways to make mistakes. The data's hard, formulas are hard. A really helpful way to do things is do things twice and do things with different formulas. So as an example here, I just did the average product revenue by doing an average of the main data source. And I did another version by looking at the total revenue divided by products and that being a separate way to calculate averages. So those are not vital, but it's a good tip. If you're doing a hard spreadsheet, keep in mind it is so easy to make mistakes in spreadsheets. So if you have a check, if you know how to do a check, do it. If there's a way to do it, do it. It's a very powerful way to avoid things. When I do monthly payroll, I have like 5 different checks in that sheet because I'm so concerned about making a mistake. And it will catch stuff. Things will be off and I will know right away, but you really should be trying to use checks when you're doing complicated data modeling. In this case, the check just means that, so this formula is, I'm calculating the average by doing B3 divided by E3, which is one way to do the average, and then just subtracting the average product revenue here, and that should be 0, because one way to calculate the average should be the same as the other way to calculate it. So if these were not 0, I'd know that something was wrong. In some cases, I would do conditional formatting that would highlight a row if it's not 0, which is a helpful way to do it. You can also do a sum of the total and make sure, like, I can put a sum at the top, and that'd be another way. And then if that one number were not 0, something would be wrong. So another good way to do it. But the point is you do want to be checking those things. These are also checks down here. So another way to do it, and I'll get into formulas in a minute, but in this case, I'm just asking if these numbers equal to 0. And if it's good, it says good. If it's bad, it would say bad. So if one of these numbers were off, you see it would turn to bad, the conditional formatting changes, everything changes. So it does help to get things much more accurate. Again, we'll get into the formula in a minute, but I'm using an if statement to decide if something is equal to 0, then it's good. If not, then it's bad. So something to keep in mind. Okay, data types. If you go to your spreadsheet, you go to format number. These are all the different data types that spreadsheets have, at least Google Sheets has. Some of these are basically the same, they look different ways, right? Currency versus financial versus accounting versus numbers. They're all really the same format, they just look different. You'll have a dollar sign, you'll have parentheses, you'll have a negative sign. Those things will change. But they're still numbers, which keeps it pretty simple. But it gets more complicated. You do have text. You can't add text. You can't add hat to car. That's not a math formula. You can add 10 to 5. That is a math formula. You can add dates. So there are different ones. It gets more complicated with duration. The odds of us needing that are pretty low. There's even more formats around currencies and data. So you can get any custom time date format you want. Again, I'm not sure the odds of us needing it, but the basics are there. The text and the numbers are the two main, and date really, but text and numbers for sure are the common ones. So if you look at the data types sheet, you'll see some examples. So numbers, again, obvious, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those numbers. Numbers with decimals, also numbers, you can do math to those. Text, again, can't do math. Regional dialects is text. C64 is text. These are all things, you can do things to them, but you can't do math, obviously. Count, number, date. So this is interesting. If you look at date here, this is the same number. 1/1/2020 is the same as 4/3/8/31. All I did was change the format. So if you go to format here, that'll say date, if you see near the bottom. It says date right there. The other one is the same thing, formatted as automatic. It's a number. So it's just something to keep in mind that you'll see weird things happening. It may just be a data type issue. So if you're trying to add something, it may see this, in some cases, as text. So that may be why you get errors sometimes when you're trying to do math to a number and it seems like there's no reason it's not working. It may be because the computer sees it as text.
Can you change that by just clicking on it?
Probably. There are some, you may sometimes need to do a formula for it. I forget what it is, but like you can convert. Yeah, so this one, format's a number to text. There's probably one that goes backwards also. But you may need a function sometimes to change a format of a number or a text. Sometimes you can just do it on a saying, which is just, if it does say text, you can change it in the format number. But sometimes you may need to do something more complicated. It's rare, but if you're exporting or importing data from other places, it may come in quotes or something which the computer may read as a text piece of data then and not a number. So just something to troubleshoot on. So here we go quickly. If you go to the right side of data types, you'll see if you try to add text, it'll give you an error, right? You can't add text. What you can do with text is you can do something called concatenate, which is just join. So in this case, the formula is equals C4, so it's just equals this cell. And then the ampersand will just put text together. So all that does is it joins it to my, in between quotes is blank space 4, blank space $, close quote, ampersand D4. So you'll see it just joins the C4, it joins this with my text, the $4, with this. So you can join text, right? Can't add, but can join. Numbers, again, we talked about, you can add. It will also join, though. So this should be, again, a pretty rare thing, but it gives you an idea of the text structure. Math is easy, right? If you add numbers together, it'll add 10 plus 4, 3, 8, 3, 1. If you do an ampersand instead of the plus sign, it will join those two. So it'll be 110, 4, 3, 8, 3, 1. Just one way to think about it. Finally, dates. Dates actually are a really valuable thing to be able to manipulate because often you do want to do math with them. EO month, that will just give you the end of the month of whatever following month you want. So in this example, the formula is EO month F4. What that means is that it grabs F4, so F4 is January 1st, 2020. And then I can get the end of the month date for any following month. In this case, I wanted 4 months later. So it gives me 4 months later, end of the month, May 31st, 2020. When you're doing real analysis, this is really powerful because obviously month ends have different days, right? Sometimes they end in 31, 30, 28, all the obvious numbers. In this case, you can always get the end of a month. So a nice, fun formula to use. You can, with dated if, date diff, you can do math. You can subtract one date from another, or the number of days, years, or months between two things. In this case, I told it D for day, so it told me the date difference between F4 and M4 in the number of days.
Slow down, Jerry.
Yep. So this is the difference between two dates in days. The letter D is for days.
You can put it in as today too to make it gradually get smaller as you approach that as well. Like I've seen equations where you put in like today and it will change.
Totally. So there is a function called today, is James's point. If you do equals today, it will give you today's date. So it can be a tool. Then James's point is you can put that as a subpart. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
You could use this formula inside the date diff if you wanted to know how many days between today and another date. So you can always join these functions together. It can get really complicated. But I think that's what you're saying, right, James? Yeah. So math can get more complicated with dates, but you can do anything you want. In this case, let's say you wanted to add 1 year and 1 month to a date. What I did was I wanted to add it to F4. So I grabbed F4. F4 is 1/1/2020. I took the year from F4. This function takes the year, and I added 1 to it. So it's going to make 2020 into 2021. I took the month from F4 and added 1 to it. So it's going to make 1 to 2. And I left the day because I wanted to keep the first day of the month. I then converted that back to a date. So this just returns, this gives me 2020 and adds 1 to it. This just gives me the number 2021. I then need to convert it back to a date. So I use the date function to convert these numbers, 2021, 2, and 1 into a date. Does that make sense? So it's a way to make, you can do any math function you need to between two dates by just breaking it into pieces and putting it back together. Formula make sense? Great. Days is a little bit easier. You can just add. So if you grab a date and just do plus 60, it'll add 60 days to it. A much simpler version, but also a little bit less flexible. Make sense? Okay. That's the date stuff. We talked about adding strings. A string is just another word for text, but it's a long list of characters, numbers, whatever it happens to be. That's not a number. So any sort of text we'll call it a string for now. Something that just is interesting to notice. So see these two? These both look like numbers, but because the computer has seen them as different things, this is a number, this is text, it aligns them differently. It aligns numbers right and aligns numbers left. So just something to pay attention to that you may notice sometimes, that because it sees it a different data type, it will do different things with it. Okay, I think that's that section. Any questions so far? Make sense? Good? Okay. You're going to all have to do this at the end, so I hope you're learning. Or you can try to do it at the end. It's up to you if you want to do it. But okay, so we were talking about how we have one source of truth for data, right? We have the master table with all the data. As much as possible, you want to limit the ways people can enter data to avoid mistakes. So there's 5 basic different ways to do it. If you go to the data entry sheet, data entry directly into Sheet. This is one just example of entering data. You can always just have people type in more rows, right? Pretty easy, obvious way to do things. It's a simple way. It works in most cases. In some cases, you may want to limit what they can do. So you can always add things like data validation to these cells. In this case, you can see I added a drop-down menu. Same thing here, a drop-down menu. In this case, if you try to type letters, it's a little slow. It'll show you an error once this is done. There you go, it'll show you an error. It'll tell you what the problem is. Here it says invalid, must be a number between 0 and 20. In this case, it'd be the same thing. And in this case, it won't even let me do it. So you have different ways to validate data, but it does help keep the source data clean. That's the basis for everything. If you have good source data, you can do anything more with it. If you don't, everything is not going to work. So this is why it's so important to get the data in cleanly. So validation, drop-downs, these are all good ways to protect the data from people entering it and making mistakes. You can also use protected ranges, which would let only, if you were in this file right now, you wouldn't be able to edit certain of these columns. I'm the only one with the rights. If you go to data, protected ranges, you'll see these columns right here. You see how it highlights when I go to that. See it turns green on the bottom left over there. That's just showing the range that only I can edit. So it protects ranges from people going and doing things they shouldn't do. Other ways to get data in, pulling from another source. This one is just an example of if you were in that main folder, there's the CSV file. Someone polluted this, but this is a CSV file. Very often you're just grabbing data from other sources, whether it's a breadcrumb export or an export from a payroll system or whatever it happens to be, and you're putting it into a spreadsheet. Another nice way to get data in is just to do that export to CSV, copy and paste in, or you can always import in. So copying and pasting, you have to be careful of whether it's bringing formatting or what else with it. Importing, it will give you a lot more options, but you can do file, import, and then you can upload files to it. So 2 different ways to get external sources in, but it's another way to get clean data into the spreadsheet.
CSV means?
Comma separated values. Generally, it just means a very clean data source without formatting, without things like that. And so the power of that also is that if we did that, if we went and let's say this was pulled from another source, and we went and we pulled that data, and we deleted all this data, we highlighted it all, we deleted it all, and we just pasted all the new data right here. All the views, all the lookups, everything else, if you don't delete your formulas obviously, would then just work. So you could just you could every week pull your source, and we do this for a lot of processes here that I'm sure you guys have heard about. Every week, every month, we go to the data source, we pull the data, we put it into the sheet, and our reports are done because everything else just feeds off of it. So it's a really powerful way to do a lot of this stuff by just pasting the data on top of that original table in a clean way.
This is probably a stupid question, but there's no way for it to automatically update if you're pulling from something like breadcrumb, right?
It's not a stupid question. So there definitely is, depends on what you're doing. We'll get to, there's one thing called import range, which can import from another Google Sheet. That's one possibility. You can do some of the stuff. You can write scripts, you can do zaps through it. So this is later in the course, but you can do zaps. You can do different things that will automatically do one thing when another thing happens. It can be based on a time trigger, like every day it pulls the data. It could be every time something else changes, it does something. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. It's not simple to set up, but to your point, it is really powerful that just when you do change something somewhere or every night, a report is run. So the answer is yes. I'll get to some of that at some point. But it does get really complicated. Sometimes it's custom scripts. If you can use Zapier, that is one thing that can do some things like this. So I'll get into some of that, yeah. And let's see. And Google Scripts actually are pretty powerful also that can do some stuff like this too. But a lot of it will take some basic coding, not too much in some cases. But you could pull in anything. You can create a code that creates a GET request that goes on the internet and pulls data from anywhere, hits an API somewhere, brings back data and inserts into the Google Sheet. It's a matter of how far you want to take it. So those are the first 2 ways to get it in. Another way, pretty obvious way, a form that you've all probably seen. So here are the 3 form examples. So we'll get into forms in a later session, but you can make Google Forms. You can make a form with all sorts of stuff. You can then send this version to people to fill out. And it will then just go into the sheet and populate this sheet. Why is this powerful? Because instead of having people type in a sheet where they can make mistakes or do weird things, if you can only fill out a form and it's only structured data and has all the validations, the data is much more likely to be clean. And people have a much easier time in many cases to filling out a form versus finding the row in the spreadsheet and doing it that way. So it's a really strong way to keep data clean and strong. Another fun way is an internal form. So you can certainly have external forms. You send people this link, they go to the link and fill it out. And you can design these things with headers and colors and stuff like that. Another fun way is that you can actually have internal forms and sheets, and this does take some coding and can be a little bit harder. But it can be a really nice way for people internally to just have a form that then just populates this sheet. So a really fun way to do that. Yep.
How do you connect external forms into one Google Sheet? How do you have that flow?
Yep.
Not this one, but like if you're in a forum or you're doing a poll or whatever.
Yep.
How do you have that then flow into the sheet?
Like one of these.
Yeah, like one of
Yep. So usually, so you can, it depends on what order you're doing it in. Once you're in the form, you can create the source with this and then just use that source to become your data source and add more sheets to it. If you have a form that you want to link to a different sheet, you can change that source. So you can, I won't go through the whole flow right now, but you can unlink that form and then link it to a different form by just then telling it where to go. So if you unlinked it, there'd be a link form here. You click on it, it would say, give me the URL of the form you want to, of the sheet you want to go to.
you can connect to the Google demo sheet.
Yeah, you connect, right. Any sheet you can connect to anything else like that. And in the sheet, you can edit forms, send forms. You can do a bunch of things with the form, but it'll pull up the form for you that way too. If I unlinked it though, it would then unlink from here. So you can unlink from here. You can unlink from the form. The form would still collect data. It would have nowhere to go. And then when you're ready, you could then link it to wherever you want to link it to by just clicking the button that's in there. So yeah, so you have the internal forms too. Again, a fun way to do it because it's just much quicker and easier. That may be simple for people. Instead of, oh, wait, here's this, where's the form? In this case, you can just go and click on the button, wherever that went, and then open the form inside the sheet. Okay. And then, so this goes to your question also. So then there are automation ways. This is what I was saying before. There are manual triggers, which is I can run a script from my command line. So you'll see. So I can go here and I can type node petty cache download JS, and that will run a script. That will go and grab my data and it'll put it into my Google Sheet. You can do funny things like make buttons. So you can do this thing. This is a dashboard I made for myself. You can just click a button that can do things like that whenever you click it. So those are human triggers, right? When I want something to happen, I take an action. I write a script. I run the script from the command line, or I click a button. That's one way. There are other ways, though, such as action triggers. So in this case, I talked about Zapier. That's a way, it's like an if this, then that statement. So if I add a row to Airtable, also add a row to this spreadsheet. If I get an email from this person that has this word in it, grab the attachment and save it to this folder. So it can integrate lots of different apps, thousands of different apps in ways like that. Like if something happens in one app, take an action in another app. It's a really powerful tool, and it doesn't take any. You can use code to make it more powerful, but you don't need to do code to use that. On edit, you can add functions to Google Sheets that will take actions when you edit something or when something happens. These are certainly more complicated, but when a row is added to one sheet, you can have something happen. You can have a row be added to another sheet. You can have something else update. You could have someone get emailed. All those things can happen automatically based on different functions you add to sheets. As I mentioned, scripts and APIs, again, those are getting more complicated, but you can write custom code that will interact with your sheet and will interact with other data sources in other places. So the triggers are, as I mentioned, there's the manual trigger of me typing something or pressing something. There's an action trigger of me doing something that then triggers something else. And there's time. You can just have something run, whether in Zapier or a script or an API, that runs every day, every hour, every minute, every week. So things that we have, so some of our reporting, in fact, some of our reporting related to the Meet Hook, every Monday, I get an email that gives me the summary that some people get. Ben and Charity get an email from me, which is just me forwarding my automated process every Monday or every month to them. So it's a really cool thing that saves me, instead of me doing 15 or 20 or 30 minutes or an hour in some cases, I just get an email that I then forward on. I look at it, make sure it looks good, and I forward it on. Or I send it to Anna, who checks it first. But it's an example of every single Monday, every single end of month, I get a report that then just I send out. So again, in the somewhat No, sorry, this is actually the simpler stuff. So jumping back into basic spreadsheet stuff, insert function. There are tons of functions. Anything you want to do in Sheets, you can do. It is incredibly powerful. Some will take really harder custom code, but there's a ton of functions in here that are actually really usable if you ask Google or just play with it and do some testing. So whatever you need is probably in here somewhere. In general, Google is your friend. If you want to add something or do something with Google Sheets, type in Google Sheets, how to, whatever. Google is your friend. There will be the most perfect blog post, answer to your question in the top 5 answers. Probably on Stack Exchange or somewhere like that, but it will walk you through step by step exactly how to do it. It is incredibly powerful. My main lesson from learning to code was that whatever I need to know, the reason I can code anything is because someone else has done it before and told me exactly how to do it. I just have to know the right query to run in Google, and the answer will be there. And I'll copy and paste the code. A lot of coding that you will do, or if you ever did that, it's just you copy what you find on the internet into your code and it works. So same thing for Google Sheets. Whatever you need to do, Google it, do some research. I'm always here to ask questions too, but it is really powerful to just ask the right question to the internet. So let's run through some of them. So some ifs. So as I mentioned, everywhere in this file, you'll see all these examples. You can click on them, you can play with them. In this one, we're in the view monthly sheet and in the total revenue column. And by the way, when you use Google Sheets, you can link directly to a cell if you ever want to. You can get link to cell and send that link to someone. It will go directly to that cell. So it's a cool way to share links. So that's why when I clicked on that link, it took me exactly to this cell. As you'll see up here, this is a sum ifs formula. What this does is it's taking a sum if a condition is met. So in this case, it's summing the master table. So again, everything comes from the master table. That is the source of everything. Summing master table, column H, it's basically H to the end, all of column H. If column F in the master table is less than or equal to the month ending before, and column F is greater than or less than or equal to the month ending, and greater than the month before. So what this is giving me is the total revenue for January. I'll look at that in one more second. So H, F, and F is equal to these and less than or equal to these dates. So if we go back to here, right, H is just the revenue, F is just the brew date. So it's going row by row and it's saying sum this if this is in January. And then all I did, once I dragged that in, so I think we talked about this a bit last time, but dollar signs make this formula absolute instead of relative. So because there are dollar signs here, I can just drag this formula down and it will work. It will fill all these cells with the exact right formula. You'll see if I click down and up, and if you do that in your own sheet, all that changes is the A2 and the A3 because there's no dollar sign in front of the 2 and the 3 in those. The rest of these numbers stay the same because there are dollar signs. So if you click down and up fast, you can see only the 2 and the 3 changes. But by just copying that same formula, I made that formula once, it does the entire row of, entire column of work for me. Average ifs is the same way. It's the same formula actually exactly, except instead of sum ifs, it's average ifs. Count ifs, the only main difference here is that because we're not averaging or summing anything, we took out the column we were summing, and we just left in these other 2 criteria. And so this is then just counting the ones that happened in that month, every row that happened in that month, and it's giving me that count. So we're at 87 products sold in that month. And again, just count ifs versus sum ifs versus average ifs. And if I were doing this, and you guys can do this as you go, you'll see as you start typing, it helps you, right? It gives you the formulas that look like it. It gives you the hint. And when you click on it, it actually tells you exactly how it works. Criteria range 1, criteria range 2, with all the tips. So a lot of this, it is helpful as you're doing it to do it with those tips, with that guidance.
Can you explain the dollar sign thing one more time?
Yeah, for sure. So
That dollar sign is representing money in that case, right?
it is right, it's not money. So it's a little slow, but in 1 second, this will paste. Okay, so you see I pasted this formula. I just Command-C, Command-V to here, and it's the same number. Why that worked is because these dollar signs say don't change the H, don't change the 2, even if you move this formula somewhere else. So it's still summing column H from row 2 to row 2579. It's still comparing the date in column F from 2 to 2579 and still using A3. If I do that same thing and I move it down to here, it'll be the same one as this because there's no $sign in front of the 2 or the 3. So those change from 2 to 3 to 3 to 4 because I pasted it one row farther down, so it added 1 to that row. So if I now drag this down right here, it'll look just like that because every row I go down, now it changes to 5 because it's now grabbing this date. If I go down again, it'll change it to 6. So because I want this formula to refer to these two dates, I need that to be flexible so that when I drag it down, this cell should refer to these two dates. This cell should refer to these two dates. But every cell here should refer to the same ranges for summing, the same ranges for the condition in the other sheet.
If you change the formula, would it change the numbers in G?
If I change which part?
The formula in the B one?
So if I change, so right here,
Are they linked together like that?
right, no, I just pasted it over again, if that's what you're asking, yeah, so here. But if I did, so if I here, so if in this formula, let's say I got rid of the dollar sign, let's say right here I get rid of the dollar sign in the front of the A2. So now when I paste it over, it's going to change the A also. So before, when I pasted it to here, it was A2 and A3 here, and it was A2 and A3 here. Now when I paste it, it's going to move and it's going to break because now the F changed to, now the A changed to F also because there's no dollar sign there anymore. So the formula broke. So if you want a formula that's going to work horizontally, you've got to put the dollar sign in front of the columns, working vertically as the rows. But the dollar sign is very powerful for that reason because, again, I wrote the formula once, I copied it down, and it worked perfectly. And same thing for sideways. So the reason I have the dollar sign, from the A, because when I did this, I just copied also, I copied this to here. It's not going to work now, but I copied that to there, and it worked. I just changed sum to average, and the same formula worked because it did the column didn't change.
Okay, so it's kind of making it easier for you to add different versions of it.
Right, you can use the same formula repeatedly.
Okay.
Otherwise, every row of this table I'd have to write a different formula for. Does that make sense, everyone? Yep. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. VLOOKUP. So this is a super cool one. This is what we talked about before. Not that all these aren't awesome, but VLOOKUP, it's a way to link two data sources. So you can have one data source, look for a reference in another data source, and return whatever is in the same row as that reference. So like all of these, if you want to, you can always type VLOOKUP, and it will give you the hints. This one's automatically adding it, so I'll do it right here. VLOOKUP, right? It'll walk you through what it all means. It's not always in plain English. You could always Google Sheets how to VLOOKUP, and it'll give you some really clear examples. Google's not the best with their explanation, but you can always do that to learn more. But the point is that it's looking up, and V is vertical, so it's vertically looking up. It's looking up B2, regional dialect B2, into the lookup table. So it's then going to lookup sheet and looking in cells A2 to B1000. So it's then going to A2 to B1000. It's looking at both of these columns all the way to the bottom. It's returning me the second column. So it could return me, if I change the 2 to a 1, it'll just return me the same thing because it'll just find regional dialect. It'll give me the same regional dialect back. Sometimes you'll do that to just check data and make sure the same source is in both places. False, the answer is just always put false there. You're never going to want true. True is a fuzzy search and just messes things up. False means find the exact match of regional dialect.
What does true mean?
It's a fuzzy search thing. If you're not sure, like if there could be a different spelling or something like that, it's just hard because you never know what's going to happen. I don't know Google's code behind that, but it will return a non-exact match. So I just always use false because I don't want non-exact matches.
Can you repeat what return to the second column means?
Yep, so it's looking at B2, looking at regional dialect, in this range, A to B of the other sheet. So these are the two rows it's looking at, or two columns it's looking at. So if I put in a 1, it would return this. If I put in a 2, it would return this. If the range were bigger, I could return column 7. Does that make sense? So it's just counting of the range of data that I was pointing to, which column I want back. In this case, I wanted the second column.
Why are you saying 2 there? Yeah, I was gonna ask this.
Because it's just counting the range. So this range could have been over here. and it's just going to return. It just wants to know the number in the range, the number of the column in the range, not the letter of it. So if the range were here, you'd still put a 2 in there. Does that make sense?
There was 4 in there.
Not if there were 4. If there were.
I understand the logic.
Oh, why did Google make it that way? Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. If you had 10 columns here, you would just tell Google which column you want back. So you wouldn't put 10. You'd put, if you want J, you'd put 1, 2, 3, 4. You'd put a 5. If you want K, you'd put a 6. So you're not putting the width of the range. You're putting the number of the column in the range that you want back. Yeah.
What are some, I guess, like real life examples of when we would want to use a VLOOKUP? Like in this case, for example, was it just that you didn't want to have to type PLL all the time, or you just wanted to know what was linked with regional data?
So it's both cases. Number one is you want one source of data for everything. So in this case, the one source of truth for which beer is which type is this. So I don't want to separate it in here because then if I change it here right now, it'll change the other sheet. So I change it once, there's one source of truth. So you want one source of truth for every piece of data.
So would you make that lookup tab first before you did anything else in this sheet? To have that be the source?
It depends on the problem you're solving. What I would have done probably in this case, if this were a real example, I probably wouldn't have had the type in here at all because I would know that every row should be data unique to that row unless it's a formula or a lookup. So in this, I would have just started with these first 5, 6 columns because that's my base data. After that, as I needed things, I would have an occasion like, oh, I wish I knew, I want to do a lookup, I want to do a sum of all the pale ales in January. You're like, okay, how am I going to do that? And say, oh, I got to add a VLOOKUP to this table to solve that problem. But at first, I would just have my original data, and I would add lookups, add formulas for reasons to solve a problem. But I would know, to your point, I would probably, in my case, I'd have this table somewhere else. I'd probably import the range or refer to the other table somehow. So I always have one source of truth for both. I would never copy it over so that no matter what, if I ever change this anywhere, it changes everywhere. So there's a bunch of different reasons to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've noticed you also use it. VLOOKUP, I find to be like one of the most useful Excel things. I know Jared uses it a lot as a bridge to other things. So if you may want to source regional dialect, and then add one of those like statements on the end of it. So just like surface all these instances of this thing, and then do this other thing.
Yeah. And an example is if I wanted to take some ifs of pale ale, I can now sum the pale ales because of adding that in.
If you've added it in, then
Yeah.
The bigger the data set, the more useful that is.
So we could have, this is total revenue, we could have done a view of this. We could add view monthly pale ale. And then we could do it based on that. Cool. Okay, so that's VLOOKUP. And Matt, did I answer your question right?
Yes.
Okay. If, pretty straightforward, it's an if-then statement. If something is true, do one of two things. If it's true, do one. If it's false, do another. And as I pointed out before, this linked directly to the cell with the URL that I mentioned. So for this one, so round is a way to round numbers. So I wanted to round to 2 decimal places, B15. So it's rounding B15, this one right here, to 2 decimal places. If that equals the round of this other way of doing it. So I remember before I talked about doing checks, where you do the same formula in 2 different ways. If the round of this equals the round of that, which they should because those are the same calculations, then tell me good, otherwise tell me bad. As we mentioned before, I also put in some conditional formatting. So it does more than that. It also, this row turns red, this row, these things turn red, which is just another cool way to call it out. But that's if then. It's just if something, then do something else. As James pointed out before, you can nest lots of stuff. So if something, and this was Josh's point too, you can say if something, do a formula here, take an action here. You can have more nested if statements. If something, then if something else. So these can go on forever. But it is a powerful way to look at data if you wanted if regional dialect, then make it a pale ale. If gender neutral, make it something else. You can take actions like that too to large amounts of data. If you wanted to apply that to this entire database, you can make an if-then formula and then just copy it down, and it would do that for the entire row. So as an example, this is not the best example, but you could say like if month of this equals 1, then you could say Jan. Otherwise you can say not or something like that. But the point is then you could just copy that down and it would do that for the entire column. So a lot of times when you're analyzing data, you need flags like this. You need to take an action on one column and have an impact on another column so you can do sum ifs and things like that. So generally these things are nested and for other problems, right? To the question before, like, it's for solving problems. That's if. Unique is just a pretty cool, fun one. I never realized how powerful it was. Excel doesn't have this and Google Sheets does, which I was surprised by. But if you do equals unique for any range, in this case it's the range of C in the master table. So if you go to, so in this table it's grabbing every single value in this column, column C, and it's just giving me the unique values. So it's giving me a list of the ones that are in there at least once, but it's no repeats, which turns out is really valuable when you're working with large amounts of data to know like, what is unique in this column or in this row. Import range, this went to your question from before related to pulling data from other places. This isn't another data source in terms of another web application, but this is another spreadsheet. So to the point of one data source, if you have 20 spreadsheets, but you have one data source for this thing, right? You don't want 20 lists of your products. You don't want 20 lists of the money you made last week. You can have all the other spreadsheets that you want to use that data in, just point to it. If you update the source, it will update here. So import range just goes to this spreadsheet right here with this link, and this range in there. So it goes to this spreadsheet, sheet master database, cells A1 to G20, and it just pulls it in here. And if you change the other one, it will change here. So again, the power of one source of data. So someone else on the team changes that, someone updates it, someone pulls the new data, it'll update here for you too. Concat, we talked about this before, and we're running out of time, so I'm going to just finish up quickly. But concat is the ampersand thing. You can just join strings, join numbers, join two cells together with an ampersand. It's actually the same thing. You can do equals text, comma text. Same thing, just two different ways of doing it. You can find strings. You can find text within text. This may be the last one for the day. So you can find text within text. So if you do, so here I wanted to find C dash in D4. So I want to find C dash in D4 starting at position 1. And it'll tell you, oh, this is in position 1. Or it'll tell you it can't find it by returning an error.
What's position 1?
The first point in the text. Yeah. So starting with C. I could put in 2 there and start with the dash. And then I could combine that with an if statement. So if is error, so this one, if is error, and the answer is this is an error, then tell me kegs, because that means if there's a C there, it's a can. If there's a K there, it's a keg. So from this cell, I wanted to get to return whether it's a can or a keg. So first I said, is there a C dash there? Yes, there's a 1, 1, 1. No, there's an error. If there's a 1 there, then tell me, if there's an error, then return kegs. If not, return cans. So for this one, it's an error, so it returns kegs. In this one, it's not an error, so it returns cans. And again, just a way to then sum by kegs and cans, if that's what I was looking for. So it's combining cans 16, it's running 6 kegs with half kegs, cans with other cans if there were other cans. We don't have any other cans here. But it's a way to change the data structure with statements like that. And this is just combining. So you see here is one formula, another formula. This is the combination of the two just in one. So it's the find is just right in there. And there's the if error outside of it. I think we're going to stop there for the day. We didn't get to the all interactive part, but at some point I was going to have you guys do some of this. Any last minute questions in the last 30 seconds? Whirlwind tour of Google Sheets? Good? Okay, thank you. You are all dismissed.